Guess this might be a day to practice our Taoist philosophy.
Indeed. Every day is a good day to practice
We
a
both got
Taoist
the
philosophy.
we both got the warning that the actual recording is in higher quality. That's good.
It's fine. Yeah. We're experiencing some storms today. Lovely thunder and lightning action. Thor be partying.
So, for clarification, since we're doing the two, this is a chat. So it's not a deep dive. We're just going to talk about a topic or concept or thing. Mm-hmm.
Indeed. Yeah. The essential idea is that Michael and I talk about this stuff in our day to day lives, anyways. So we figured we'd do it on a recording and people can
But,
engage with whatever they would like from it.
but also, it's a incentive for us to learn because that's the thing. Is like I spent the last 2 hours like doing research, and it's funny finding terms for things that like I've thought about or like familiar with, but I just didn't know what the literature said on it. Um, so part of the thing is for us to learn and grow because the early stuff
Absolutely.
was really just the freeform chats, and then for better content and to make it more valuable for us to like do it, we've started taking notes even with the chats just to give ourselves a reason to learn.
Yeah. Nothing is more valuable than being able to take your thoughts with new information and be able to put them outside, to observe them, to observe new information, observe your thoughts, not attach yourself to so much of it. That's not even like a Zen thing so much that they talk about it, but like it's just a good thing to do is be able to entertain new information without marrying any of it.
Well, I think
So
that ties right in with the topic for today, which it seems redundant to say it since it's going to be in the title. If you found this, you can see the title. But philosophy.
subtitle, why though?
But okay, but here's the thing, right out of the gates, like that's my thing about why I wanted to make sure to take notes. 'Cause I'm like, I know where we're gonna go naturally, so I wanted to write some notes to try and keep us around philosophy instead of philosophizing together. Because like, why though is more of a metaphysical question, which isn't the whole of philosophy. Because there's
Absolutely.
what
Yeah.
and how much. So
Precisely. Yes. And it ties into a lot of the ease. Uh, yeah. Psychology, pedagogy, the formal study of teaching, many things. Yeah. And
yeah,
it's
well, it's the grandfather of all arts and sciences. Arts in the sense of skill. Well, I guess not arts. Art, definitely
well,
sciences.
I'll jump on the art one. I've had this conversation many times with people. It's,
Oh yeah, aesthetics,
you
duh.
know, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like there is a philosophy. The whole point is philosophy, really.
And music comes from math, and math comes from philosophy. All right, yeah, the philosophy is the grandfather of all artistic and scientific endeavors.
Pretty much. Yeah. Music is a funny one because even if it's not, it does, like, math is the DNA of music, more or less. But even if the composer is not thinking mathematically as a composer, thinking more expressively, um, the philosophy is right there with it. They're expressing because this, because
Yeah,
that.
which is which is like the first note I wrote is like it's not the first note. I tried to find a definition, but like everybody does and experiences philosophy.
Right.
We like to think of
So
it
when
as like
did
this academic thing separate from us, but it's not.
right? Well, it's because philosophers tend to be more academic and separated
Well, when
socially.
people say philosophy and then they talk about the history of philosophy, which is why I never took a philosophy course, is because everybody I've talked to that took a philosophy course, yeah, they experiment with like types of thoughts and certain essays, but it's mostly like a history of philosophy, and then you're working through that stuff. It just seemed, I don't know, unnecessary when you can just do the philosophizing.
Yeah, there's the history of it, there's the practice of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is one cool part about the arts is you do end up taking art history, music history, uh, history of theater is one as well. All the arts have their history courses if you go the academic route,
Mm-hmm.
and a huge part of studying them is the practice of, because it's very rare that in rehearsals, take music rehearsals, in rehearsals, they don't really talk too much about the history of what you're doing. It's just, let's get the thing down, let's tighten the screws and make it a polished piece to expose people to and
Mhm.
get them feeling something. You learn about the history stuff in a separate portion. Now, when all of that kind of coalesces together and makes you a more complete artist, your decisions are more informed, which I think is a big reason why history is important and why we study it.
I feel like the top of the league self-taughts trump most of the top of the leagues academically taught in almost any art. Not science necessarily, but definitely art.
A lot of the time, yeah. And the reason that is because we talk about this constantly, because those people are doers.
Oh, and they make more mistakes.
That's just it. Yeah. I think I talked about this in a different video, so I won't expound on it too much. But there was a study done with a photography class, and one half of the class was told
Yep.
to take photos all semester, refine, do whatever, and turn one in, pick one. Doesn't have to be the very last one you take, but pick one, give it in as your final. The others were taught to study photography and basically take one photo at the end and turn that in. And naturally, as you might guess, the people who got to experience photography for a longer period of time rather than just study the theories of it turned in much better and much more original photos. So it really is just part of it.
Which ties into the fact that art is like historically related to skill, but that's a conversation we're going to have separately from this one. So,
Right.
for the first note was me trying to define philosophy. I looked up a couple different ones. There's like the textbook, The Study of the Fundamental Nature of Knowledge, Reality, and Existence. Um, but the one I like the most, because it's the broad one that people think of with philosophy, um, and in a way that's still practical, is an activity of attempting to understand the world in all its aspects,
Wow.
which is
Sky high
how
aspirations. Okay.
well that's how everything falls into philosophy, right? Like you're doing science, it's a subset of philosophy. Doing psychology, subset of philosophy.
So it's a philosophy is exercising the tools to understand what's around you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Then yeah, that's why I study psychology for fun. I want to understand people and their actions.
mhm.
That makes perfect sense. Still, once I figure that out, I'll let you know. But I think that one's an ongoing process. Why do we do things? I don't know. We're bored. We're born and we're bored. But
It
okay,
is.
so can you help define then? Because we're thinking about what philosophy is. It's naturally tied to philosophers, and we all get this idea of kind of who those people are.
Mhm.
How do we define a philosopher? Because I think it's been academicized, if that's a word, a little too much.
Yeah, that's hmm, that's a tough one because I consider myself a philosopher. I feel like in the modern era, for most people, it's do you have a book or do you do lectures?
Right.
Practically speaking, do people write
Right.
books about you? Have you written a book or do you actively teach?
Sure.
Um, but I don't know. To me, it's more of I think of it exactly like any of the other arts. So like, because I'm a self-taught philosopher, so I see it in the same way. It's like if somebody's like, well, I'm a musician. It's like, oh, where'd you go to school? It's like I didn't. Like I don't need a degree to tell me I do my art. I just practice it, and I can show you it. In this
Right.
case, the podcast is me showing it, and I've written one book that I self-published. It was a little rough,
But
but
you
it was
did it.
fun. Yeah.
That's more
Well,
than most have done.
and it was my theory that like it was before the dopamine uh, thing became such a big deal. It's like right when it started because I was studying stuff and learning stuff. Um, but it was called, dopamine and lifestyle because it's like the same way you can get addicted to certain activities and drugs. It's like you can get addicted to the feeling of being on a skateboard. Like, so I was playing with this idea of like we can get addicted to basically anything, specifically within lifestyle. So you can start living a certain way, and then that way rewards you some way neurochemically. And I was young, so I could be totally wrong on how the mechanics work, but the theory was there, and I still think it stands.
It does. I mean, other other studies, other books have explained as much, So you are correct, or at least you're not wrong. But yeah,
Well,
because the
philosophy.
right,
Not really.
well, I may not be correct, but at least I'm not wrong. Oh, fantastic. Because yeah, a philosopher, like in some sense, we all are. As we were talking about before, we're all trying to understand the world, and it's whatever tools we use to do so.
Everybody will sing their favorite song. They're not singers. Everybody like does philosophy, but they're not philosophers. To keep it on the music analogy, it's
Sure,
natural
yeah,
to us. That would be a better way to put it.
yes, absolutely, yeah. That's a really good way to put it. But then it begs the question, right? Of where's the line of when one becomes a philosopher?
Well, I'll turn it back on you. When does somebody become a musician and not just somebody who has the appendages to pluck strings?
Absolutely, yeah. That is a funny tangent to go on of how unnatural, like music is natural to us.
Mhm.
Playing music on instruments, not very natural. It's very funny.
Well, our capacities for it are natural, though, right? That was my whole point about the appendages. It's like you can pick up a stringed thing and you just hold and flick, hold and
Sure,
flick, hold and flick.
sure.
It's not a
But our
complicated.
bodies, it's funny though, because our bodies are not made to, they can do those things, but they're
Mhm.
not, our bodies are not for those things. It's such a weird,
I would
funny
say the
thing.
same goes with philosophizing, right? Like
Our
we're
brain
the
is
same.
made for it, but,
No, we're not
or
made
no,
for it.
yeah,
You
that's
have
right.
to you have to train, and that's the difference. Is training the faculties and capacities for it.
So there it is. Yeah, yeah. Which I was about to say with the music stuff, because that's,
Yeah, because same thing with martial arts, right? Like, what's that make somebody a martial artist versus somebody who can just pick up their fist and hit somebody? Like, it's the training.
right. Oh, yeah. And then we do fall into the trap, right, of identifying so hard with it that, because I've seen, there's videos out there of, trained martial artists, if you want to go that route, trained martial artists just getting decked by a street brawler, right? And, you know,
Well, well, they're not master fighters, so they're master martial artists.
it's true. It's true. Yeah. There's a lot of splicing you can do that pie chart has many, many pieces to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So if it's not history, it's more of the observation and the action based on that.
It's the active pursuit of understanding.
Okay. Yes. And is it required then to enact, like to put action into the understanding? Is it kind of a recycling deal?
I mean, yes. If you're talking about like you have to actively work to understand, then yeah, that's kind of like the prerequisite.
Yeah, that's
You don't
part
have
of
to
it.
necessarily apply the understanding, which is a separate part of it.
That was kind of
Yeah.
where I was leading with that
Mm-hmm.
question. So,
Well, that's there's plenty of people who, um, in a discussion or debate, can talk well. They're good orators, and they've worked out the logic and reasons of things. So they have both of those things, right? They've thought through the concepts and they can talk about it well, but they can't master the habits of it, right?
absolutely. As someone who teaches, I understand that completely. Because as a teacher, it's funny, there's, we talked about mastery or self-development, whatever you want to term it as, but we have a whole video on self-development, and it's funny because the people who help others develop themselves, teachers, coaches, mentors, what have you, their skill set isn't necessarily the action itself. It's the knowing how to teach the action. They obviously have
Mm-hmm.
to have some capacity for the action too, or at least have
Well,
had.
yeah, I mean,
But
you get the fat sports coach, like it's a cliche.
I was just about to say that. Look at most American football coaches, like the
Uh,
professional
I
ones.
was going to say football, but that's what it is.
But it is, yeah, more so than anything else. Um,
That's
and
because
yeah,
in soccer they typically really played soccer.
yeah,
But
and
to be fair,
football, yeah,
soccer is less military based as far as like its execution. So
Absolutely, yeah. Soccer's a lot more organic to, there's an open space, we have a ball and some people.
I would say it's the difference between like telling the cavalry how to cavalry and laying out all the different formations, like the front line, the artillery, right? So it's the do you know how to run this squad? In which case you kind of have to have been on the horse to know how the dynamics work versus okay, I know what these different pieces are. I got to move them around.
Sure, yeah.
Which to tie this all in, like analogy, right? We use analogies all the time. That's a philosophical concept. Our ability to, and I will still undo the episode on symbolism, but our ability to like go into abstracts and back, right? Like that comes from the philosophical zhuzh that we do.
Entirely. That is why people talk about, you want to read. Reading is good for you, all that kind of stuff. And everyone thinks that they just mean nonfiction books, how-to books or self-help books, books to develop skills, all that kind of stuff. But reading fiction is just as important on many levels. Maybe not for the same reasons, but reading fiction is exercising the muscle of imagination. You have to be able to take yourself out of reality, put yourself somewhere else and view what's going on and experience and observe that.
Become jaded in that, and I don't think that's true. I've come to see books as just television with words, fiction books.
Sure. Now, like you said though, you have to do the work. So yeah,
Right.
I can read something or watch a show. We talked about this personally. We both love anime. A lot of people do,
Hmm.
and if you're watching, you can just view it and watch it as a training arc. And anime is art on some levels. A lot of the time,
Hmm.
some of it is written more as entertainment. It's just another pop culture thing. But a lot of it is art. A lot of it is art in many ways, and they it's a medium in which you're put into a situation, you're viewing a situation, and you're meant to kind of ponder what the character is feeling. If you're just watching the character passively, feel what they feel, you're just kind of observing, going, okay, that's a scene that happened. The work is in, I guess, practicing empathy for that. Like, wow,
So it's,
if I'm put in
it's
that
it's
situation.
it's understanding, right? Back to the
It
philosophy
is.
thing.
Yeah,
It's
empathy is
for
understanding. Empathy is a
yeah,
form of understanding. Yes.
but can you empathize with a fiction? I guess, yeah, right?
Hmm. Yes.
Hmm.
Yes, you can. And it might not be the what the author intended, but that's not really the point, right? If the
Mhm.
author of the work if they wanted you to feel, I'm going to be very basic, if they wanted you to feel sad, right? If it's a sad time, but you view it as a more just contemplative time, then that's you practicing contemplation, you know.
I've learned anything from people's creative use of videos and music. Music determines the mood of any given scene.
Absolutely. That's why John Williams makes more money than any composer alive. Absolutely. That man saved Star Wars. Those are some shitty movies without his music.
But so that's the thing, right? Is like in all stories have built-in lessons, yet most people don't learn lessons from stories. I guess that's my point.
Correct. Yes. Now, we can start asking why that is, because most stories have things to draw and put into our lives.
Mhm.
If you choose to do that, you can choose not to. It's usually a choice, maybe not made consciously all the time, but there's always a choice of seeing and experiencing something, whether through the story or in your own life, whatever it is, and absorbing the knowledge you get from it and either putting it into action or just having it. That's
Mhm.
something that a lot of people fall into. It's a form of procrastination, actually, that I follow quite often. The like hoarding of knowledge, the gathering of knowledge in preparation, but you never actually do the thing. So, and that's actually what I view philosophers as sometimes. They seem to want nothing more than to just talk about all their ideas, and very few of them seem to live them out.
Mhm.
And it's frustrating to watch and to see. It's the do as I say, not as I do type people, and that
Yeah.
pisses me off.
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
we're all hypocrites, right? Every human on this earth is a hypocrite sometimes. That's just part of life. But there seems to be levels there seems to be degrees of hypocrisy that we can stand and not, you know. And so philosophers, for whatever reason, they get my Sauron's eye whenever they're not acting the way they say they should.
Hmm. Well, but the trouble is, it's the, I guess hypocrisy is the word you use for it, but you can read a book on, I don't know, habits or diet or fitness or whatever, and then you have the knowledge, but making it happen is a whole nother thing.
Mm-hmm.
Which
Yes.
I guess the thing is, a true philosopher has to, okay, looping back around, a true philosopher has to enact on it because if you're taking it from the word, the etymology of the word, it's wisdom. And wisdom is specifically in relation to experience. Knowledge is part of that, but it's also the experience and the like right action and right judgment. So everything besides the knowledge part is like the experience in some way or the action in some way. It's not a lover of knowledge; it's a lover of how knowledge translates into experience and action.
Absolutely. Yeah. I suppose an academic is a lover of knowledge, more or less.
Yeah, I think it'd be a better. Hmm.
And a lot of them, like, we're kind of having to dissect these often because just in our subconscious, in our popular view of this, it's all so intertwined to us because it's presented to us that way more often than not. But there's lots of philosophers out there that you wouldn't expect to be philosophers necessarily. Like, you don't waltz in with a tweed jacket and an air of like, let me tell you.
Just because I do think it's so funny, I'll point out my Ryan Holiday thing where it's like he's a Stoic scholar, Stoic philosopher. I haven't read enough of his works to say he's doing anything than like translating to a modern audience. Which again, I love his works, so it's not a bashing Ryan Holiday as a scholar because I love his work of Stoicism and how he's popularized it. But is he a Stoic philosopher? I don't think so.
Yeah, and I'm familiar with him. I have read some of his stuff. It is good. I don't know if I've ever seen him claim to be a Stoic philosopher.
No,
either.
I don't think he is. But he's never denounced that he's not. Right, so he lets that air go on.
Right.
But
right.
I've seen some of his tweets where the fallacies were obvious, and I'm like, bro.
Yeah.
You can't just be chill about it. If you're gonna be studying philosophy, you should think through the things. Philosophize through them. So.
Yeah. And it's one of those things. You say it all the time. I've absorbed it into my vernacular. Words matter.
Yeah, which is one of the notes I wrote with talking about philosophy because that's a big thing. With once you start getting into how people experience philosophy in their lives, you start having to play with a lot of words.
It's true, and even just in general, as a teacher, I actually just today worked with a marching band for it's their first practice of the season, and they were reading some of their music. We were teaching them they have like a warm-up packet to kind of make a routine out of warming up their bodies and their instruments and then playing their show music. So we were going through the warm-up packet because it was kind of the first time a lot of them have seen that. And basically, to kind of harken back to our self-development portion, our self-development video, to get good at something is not very exciting to see. It's a lot. Yeah. It's not a very exciting time. That's why the training montage, that's why it's a montage. Right.
A good point. Good reference.
Right. That's why it's a montage. You get a couple of highlights where they're working hard. Where Rocky's punching the meat, like, that's great. He's doing that for like an hour straight. That wasn't like 3 minutes of cool stuff. Anyways.
To get into like the practical aspects of philosophy, it's one of the big rails against like the modern state of capitalism where it's like, vacation, nice car, it's all about these moments. And it's like most of life isn't moments. Most of life is movement. Most of the movement is boring.
Absolutely. And philosophy is often how we cope with that. I mean, take the Buddhist philosophy of most of life is suffering. So you have to embrace those simple, you do have to embrace the simplicity of all. That's the very Zen part of it all,
Hmm.
is it's not about the spikes. It's just about keeping on and enjoying the ride. That's a
Well,
very Taoist thing as well, but that, we'll get into that.
religion in general, including Buddhism, is meant to spice up that with the flavoring. Like, yes, it's mundane, but you're working towards your next incarnation, but you're doing the work of the Savior, but your God is watching you. Like, it's meant to spice up all that stuff. Which,
That's a good point.
to be fair, it's quite practical. I do like it. I think it's good. I
Yep,
think we're missing some of that spiciness and the monotony of life. To just
truly,
appreciate living for living, not living for goals.
truly. And that's just it. So to tie up my story that I started
Oh,
tangentializing
sorry.
on, but no, that was my fault. Uh, Something I was telling them about getting good at something, getting good at their instrument, getting good at anything. It's really not that exciting, but I'm very big on how we use our words and how we understand the words we use. Excitement and engagement are two different things. Something cannot have to be very exciting, but it can be engaging. And that's what we're going for. You want to engage yourself with life. It doesn't all have to be explosions and Michael Bay films. It's all it's very much like you can. I don't want to use the word mindfulness. I'm not a huge fan of that whole thing. I do it. I'm a fan of using it, but like to
What?
talk, I know hypocrisy. It just has a connotation these days that I just don't really vibe
The
with.
connotation, new agery,
A little bit,
new
yes.
age fuckery.
It's it, so the word mindfulness, we're kind of veering, but we'll bring it back. The word mindfulness gets used too much. It's kind of just a catch-all for
And they try and make it seem like it's this ecstatic, blissful state, and it's not.
no.
However, I think your point on it is much more accurate. It's about the engagement because turns out everything in life is full of life. So if you dive into something rather than the thing is, if you're looking at it surface level, it's boring and not exciting. If you get into anything, there's a vitality in it. Doesn't matter what it is, and you can pull some of that out. That's what replenishes you. That's where the engagement and satisfaction is.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one tool that people use that I actually really enjoy as well is to practice gratitude, because gratitude is engagement. So that is a really powerful one and a very easy one. Most people can do that in some way. It's also a
Yeah,
fun little like logic puzzle to like, okay, how can I be grateful for this? You start to make your mind do some work there. It's really
that's
nice.
simply something that is nice to have an anchor habit for. It's easy to be like, oh, I'm going to be more grateful, but really, like, get a gratitude journal or do a gratitude meditation, like,
Hmm.
anchor an activity with it. Because it's one of my biggest personal things I've taken away from all the self development stuff I've done is how important that is. And I did it pretty consistently with like journaling and meditations for a couple of years. So in my
Hmm.
day to day, it's pretty regular, but I can tell when a week goes by and I feel just off. And I know part of it is I'm not connecting to the gratitude of things.
Right. I uh I grew up Catholic, right? And so saying prayers at mealtime was a big thing. Now, I didn't have a great time with that. Not because it was like forced and I wasn't hit or anything if I didn't pray, stuff like that. But it wasn't any of that. My parents are lovely people. It's just uh, Catholics have like just pre-written prayers. So as a kid, you're just taught them and not
Hmm.
what they mean and not what they stand for. Uh, so that has its whole thing. Nowadays, because I still use some of that ritualisticness, the routine part of it. And so like I sat down, I had like teriyaki chicken with some rice and some strawberries on the side, whatever. And I sat there and I took all of 10 seconds to just think about where all of that came from. The amount of infrastructure and people, human people involved in getting all that to where I can have just a nice meal before recording today. It's
Hmm.
just those little things and it reminds you that there's other people. It's this web of connections in the world.
You could do
And
my train of thought, and it leads you back to, well, it was nourished by the soil, which is a bunch of dead things ground up, being eaten by living things and pooped out. And it was also fed by the sun, a giant
a star. Who the fuck
physic
knows what those are? Yeah.
yeah, physic-chemical explosion that sits
Yeah.
up in the sky.
Yes.
So,
So mine has a little more psychological bent to it, I think. Yours
yeah.
has a metaphysical bent to it. But that's just
Well,
our styles. It doesn't
well,
really matter, to be
you're
honest.
more of a people person.
To
I'm in
put
charge of
it blunt.
marketing.
Oh goodness. But that's just it. We have different, I don't know if we have different philosophies, if to put that point blank is too much. But if we just take how that study, that little logic study, whatever you want to call it, I think about the connections between people. You think about the metaphysical connections and the dancing of the universe.
Mhm.
Is either one of us wrong? No. We did the exercise correctly.
Yeah.
Now, I wanna dive into, so those two examples that we each have concerning thinking about how our dinner got where it got and why we're grateful for it. Are those two different philosophies that we have? Oh yeah, you're good.
You're on or am I fuzzy?
It is. You're a little fuzzy.
X fingers off. Switch. Well, I guess I'm just gonna be fuzzy, so that'll be fun.
It'll
Hey,
find you. It'll
pay for
find
the
you.
HD camera and freaking nothing.
Oh, it's an HD camera. It's just HDing the wrong stuff.
um,
Is that real or religion? Oh, it's a real legend.
but no, those are technically different, like schools of philosophy.
Sure. And I
But
think
yeah,
it's important to, so if we can both agree that, whatever those schools are called, it doesn't really matter, but we both have different viewpoints, and yet we are two very good friends. Like, I think that's just a really important thing to remember, is that there are many schools, many views of thought, and coexisting is a thing that can and should happen, because you and I grow as people when we talk, because we are different, and that's important.
But we come to the same conclusions, and that's where it gets tricky. Is people are having the problem where they're coming to different conclusions because they're using different metrics of philosophy, or they're just outright bathing in fallacies and just refuse to deal with it.
So we have a couple of cults and holy wars. What's the big deal? Yeah.
The cult of science and reason and logic.
It's
Makes
true.
me sound like a postmodernist. Don't like them either.
So, okay, I have one. I know we're not supposed to talk about, some of these things in this. You're trying to avoid it. But I have to ask, because when people start seriously diving into philosophy, or they dig a little deeper, or they start coming to conclusions on their own, nihilism gets very tantalizing sometimes.
Okay, I put it with somebody about this earlier.
Okay.
They were making the point that like nihilism, it's like it's a very superficial understanding of nihilism to be like it's about like over skepticism and atheism. Their conclusion was it's typically just depressed Christians, which if you study the commentary on nihilism, it's a pretty good case about Nietzsche basically being like if you knock out the religions, nihilism is what happens. But it's meant to be a phase. And it doesn't just apply to religious people. If you have any sense of metaphysical system and you knock it over, you end up in nihilism. But it's meant to be a phase. It's basically, I was thinking about this earlier after responding to the tweet. It's like nihilism's like emptying out your house so you can clean it. When people
Okay.
say they're nihilistic, it means you forgot to put stuff back in it because you're like, well, it's just going to get dirty again.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, well,
Okay.
no, you bring stuff back in, it'll be a cleaner house, and like, now do the maintenance or whatever it is. But like, the point's to clear out the space to do something with. If you clear out the space and you just have that space, well, then yes, it's nothing, and that's really hard to work with. But it's not a destination; it's a process, a tool.
That's so interesting. So, and that's so Taoist, because one of the whole things is, a a cup is useful because it's empty. You can put stuff in it. So that's a very interesting. So nihilism is useful because it's you emptying yourself, and then you should be able to receive, a better version of the information or whatever it is.
Mhm.
So that's interesting to use it as a tool,
Still say
because
the
it's so easy to
dangerous
just
tool.
go. It is. No, it's definitely, that's why I called it tantalizing, because
Mhm.
if you want to decide that nothing matters, you're kind of right.
Mhm. You're not
If
wrong.
right. Yeah. Yeah. That's just it. That's just it. If you really decide, well, nothing matters, there's really no good argument against that fact, because
Well,
it is kind of a fact.
so, I think it was one of my first things in either
It was one of
our,
your first TikToks.
yeah, it was on our account, yeah,
Uh-huh.
with the description of how to oversimplify the concept, and then lots of complaints about how it was oversimplified. But if somebody's like, well, why bother? It's like, well, why not? Right? That's going to be your ground of logic. Like, okay, then we'll play this game. Well, it doesn't mean anything. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean anything. Well, if it doesn't mean anything, then it doesn't mean anything. You're right back where you started. Two negatives cancel each other out. Two wrongs
Yeah.
don't make a right.
Yes. Two lefts
Unless
do.
they do.
But,
Yeah.
yeah. But and that's something I kind of came to as well. One of my saving grace phrases that I tell myself is, well, the time passes either way. So, and that always gets me. I don't know what it is about that phrase, but it gets me into action usually, because it's like, well, I could play video games or I could, go to the gym. The time passes either way. But when that time is over, I will either have gone to the gym, probably a good thing, or played a bunch of video games, which, are fun.
So,
they're fun in the moment, but those will
Okay, so
always be there for you.
what's the part two then? Because the phrase, well, time passes either way, if you take from a nihilistic perspective, is like, well, I can work out and eventually die, or I can play video games and eventually die. Like, that's how I read into that statement. So is there like a second part you tell yourself to be like, the time passes either way, but later down the time scale, the timeline, I will be either this person because of the activity or this person, which kind of defeats the saying.
Well,
Not to
that's
ruin
precisely
your saying. But
no. It's good to pick these things apart. I'm still going to use it. Fuck you.
ain't broke, don't fix it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing, though. It means something to me, even if it doesn't make complete sense. So now
It's all
that
just
can
symbolism and
be
language.
that can be a dangerous route too. But it's my truth. But
Oh
yeah.
boy.
Yeah, exactly. But yes, to answer your question, yeah, it is like the two paths in a wood, the Robert Frost poem, two paths diverged in a wood, that whole thing. So if you're going to end up in the future, no matter what you do, you might as well like who you're going to end up as. So you might as well do what it takes to like who you are later.
See, now you're looking at using forethought. So now we're the same thing where it's hard to apply your knowledge. It's hard to build habits, right? So it's like you're working against the resistance of the fact that you can know it's better to do something for the future, but your neurochemistry, your bio machine now is like, like that's not enough of a visceral incentive to like activate the mechanism. So you have to like override it with a software program, or the Tony Robbins motion creates emotion. Like you have to somehow kick yourself into gear with like discipline. But the just
Absolutely.
saying like, oh yes, it makes sense, I would do that. Making sense doesn't make action. Otherwise, it'd be really easy to settle debates and discussions.
Right. Oh, wouldn't that be nice? But I guess then we'd be out of a podcast. Because everything's like, it would take 2
We're
minutes.
not trying to change anybody's opinions. If anything, we're trying to like accidentally walk
Expand.
people in. We're trying to walk people like across the pit of nihilism on our little bridge. So
Yes. Oh, and I could see it. And at the end of that little bridge is the like little signpost. It just says it's tricky. Then they pass through. Yeah.
well, that's tricky. You look forward, it's just another bridge and another pit. We're like, let's go again. This isn't very exciting, but it's engaging, right?
But it's engaging. Yeah. This isn't This is
Oh,
not easy, but it's kind of simple, isn't it?
what are the stakes? Would you like me to put stakes in the pit? How about
Right.
snakes in the pit?
But that is what it's like. We're just kind of bumbling through it all. Everyone's just trying to live their lives more or less.
Although, so total tangent. This one's gonna be all over the place. But that's why it's a chat, not a deep dive. So
Yeah.
I showed you Destiny recently.
Hmm.
Destiny is a hallmark for logical philosophy because that's what he uses. He focuses on linguistics, logic, reason
Yes.
to like, um,
This is the YouTuber, TikToker, the content creator, not the video game.
yeah,
For those
yeah.
listening, yeah.
Um, but like there's a bunch of things of like him dunking on people, right? And like, or people pretending like they're talking at his level, but he like puts it up here and then they just don't follow. But I've seen
Right.
a bunch of. It's funny because like he falls more to the liberal camp, but
Hmm.
because of some of my philosophical interest, like I get a lot of conservative content. So they're like, "Oh, you like him, but you also like conservative content. How would you like to see people dunking on him?" And it's always clips that are like out of context. And even within the clips, he usually brings up something that like tears apart what they said. It just doesn't seem like that unless you know, like unless you can think through what he just said.
Right.
But he doesn't get a chance to defend himself. It's like, oh, look how they got him. It's like, but they didn't though. Like,
Right. I see that quite often. How this is just one of my pet peeves in all of duetting or stitching things, uh, and this is older than TikTok for sure, but people taking things out of context and arguing with that little snippet of what they said, or just the superficiality of it all,
mhm.
and how if you scratch just a little bit, it all falls apart. So clearly, you're just going for the quick jabs and not the knockout punches, which is it's a cheap way to fight after a while.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because we're actually in a space where we have a lot of good uh, public sphere intellectuals that get bad reps because of like misunderstandings of them. Because like there's plenty of valid criticisms like Jordan Peterson, but a lot of what people don't like Jordan Peterson for isn't true. Because like he has specific pieces that entirely like negate some of the like commentary on him. Um,
Precisely, yes. Now,
but
like
but
you
if you want
said
to talk about
before,
like
he
his
has some
biblical,
other he yeah, he has some other stuff that you're kind of like, I disagree entirely, and
or
that's
if you're like,
okay.
well, he's doing an entirely Jungian and not theological like translation of the Bible. He acts like it's the right way to do it, but theologically it's not. It's like that's a valid argument. Like
Right.
that he
Absolutely it
just and
is.
he
Yeah.
just he stumbles off with the assumption and the arrogance like this is the right way. And I'm Jungian, so I think it's all pretty good. But from an argument standpoint, from a reason and logic standpoint, it's a really good criticism because it's like,
Mhm.
well, yeah, he totally switches it into his lane, which makes it work. But that's a very different criticism than what you hear about people like him.
Right. Yeah. And that's a huge one is uh this is a slight tangent, but not really. It's something called switch tracking. I think I've talked to you about it, but I don't think it's been on a recording before.
Nope.
Uh, so what switch tracking is when two people are having a conversation or a debate, they're it seems like they're having the same conversation together, but they both mean different things in the conversation. The example used, I learned this on the Hidden Brain podcast, one of uh, oh shoot, who NPR, one of NPR's podcasts, Hidden Brain. It's fantastic psychology podcast. And the example they used was from I think it was from a show or a play, something scripted, but it proves the example pretty well of a man coming home with flowers for his wife. And his wife pretty much just tells him, like, haven't you forgotten? I said I don't like receiving flowers. And the man then gets mad about, well, you could at least say thank you for the thoughtfulness of the gift. And suddenly we are in the same conversation going two different directions of he doesn't listen to me and she doesn't appreciate me.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're having the same conversation with two different meanings. And I feel like that happens so often,
So we're not
especially in these debates.
yeah. So we're not gonna talk about the subject itself, but you see it a lot with the pro-life, pro-choice debate, where one's talking like the morality thing, right? It's like, oh, well, you think killing a baby's good, and the other one's talking a like metaphysical thing. It's like you're making an assumption that like consciousness happens here or like life happens here. Like there's an underlying assumption that you're just jumping on to then use the moral argument. They're like, we're debating the other point, the metaphysical thing of like when is it consciousness, when does it become human, and like the same sense and all that type of stuff. So it's like they're having two different philosophical arguments, and they just
Yeah,
um,
that's why you're never going to see a consensus, is because they're arguing different points
uh-huh.
and they refuse to budge, because to start budging is to admit, you know, wrongness or defeat in some way, and that's not okay.
Although to give Destiny a plug, if you want to watch somebody do the philosophical side of it, because like the moral argument's pretty straightforward. Um, you know, like is killing babies right? It's like no, like that's a pretty easy one. It gets tricky when you get to the philosophical thing because it's somewhat arbitrary, right?
Right.
Unless you're just picking either a metaphysical system where it happens at conception because of metaphysical reasons, blah blah blah. But
Right.
if you're doing the taking everything, right, no assumptions, it's going to feel arbitrary. And he does a very good job of describing like how consciousness works. It's like if we're gonna pick a point, let's pick consciousness. And he does a very good job of like, and he's not saying we should pick consciousness. He's just like, if you wanted to like make a point, this is when you can make a point for. Because like saying it's at conception, it's like, well, why is it at conception? It's like, oh, it's because it's a life. It's like all your cells are alive, right? So it's like the when you unpack the moral arguments, typically they don't stand on a strong metaphysical ground. Where he does a very good job of being like, look, there's a really good point you can make that you can at least then build the system on, and then start having the moral discussion, which should go much more smoothly because that's a pretty easy discussion to have. But so if anybody's
Definitely.
interested in watching somebody like unpack that topic, because I've watched a bunch of stuff and it's mostly just the two sides yelling at each other. He's the first person I've seen that like really works through a lot of it.
That's perfect. Yeah, and we need lots more of that. And it's hard. It can be hard because you have to be okay with ruffling someone's feathers like that, because they're not going to be okay feeling
So
like getting
this is
talked to
important.
that way sometimes.
This is an important note. Like in his own feeds when he was doing his own content, he's like, look, the fact of the matter is like I have my personal opinion on it, right? Where it's like it, because it seems arbitrary, even with the argument he's making, he's like, I'm just kind of picking that point. He's like, so theoretically, if you can't pick a point, you got to pick the first point. But then you're also saying that, well, now I need to impose the point I picked on other people. He's like, that's where the problem is,
Right.
right? So it's like even when he's like defending his points and stuff, he's just doing it from a philosophical thing. He's like, we're having a discussion or a debate about the philosophies of it. That's not the same as what I think, but also part of my philosophy is because I think it doesn't give me the right, because it makes sense to me to impose it on other people.
Yes, and that is so important to recognize. Half the time we don't always recognize when we are, at least I'd like to believe we don't always recognize it's a simple mistake that we start to indoctrinate people, because that's just how we see it so often. We accidentally start trying to convince people rather than just explain to them what we're thinking. And it's inappropriate most times. We just don't realize we're doing it.
It's a weird byproduct being tribal social animals.
Mm-hmm.
Is we
It
kind of
is.
want
It is.
everybody in the tribe, and that makes it really uncomfortable. And it's like, well, you're not though. So either I need to like bring you in somehow, or
Or kill you. Yeah.
yeah,
Like that's in the back of our, it's in the spinal part somewhere. I either need to hug you or kill you.
although, so this is one of the points I want to make on this podcast is when people think of philosophy, they think of normally the academic sense, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
the history of philosophy, all these philosophers, there's this high-minded stuff about what is nature, what is meaning. And it's like, that's not just philosophy. Philosophy is what dictates politics.
Yeah.
Like how we manage everything is based on morality, ethics, economics, like all of these things. And when you get to more of like some of it, it gets a little more science-y, but in general, philosophy is the main underlying thing for politics. So
Precisely.
it's important.
It's so funny you mentioned that, because as soon as you started talking about like that, well, you think it's wrong to kill babies. Well, yeah, obviously. I'm like, well, there was a time when the city-state of Sparta would disagree with you.
Right.
Like, and that was just part of it, right? Their philosophy was strength. Be ready to fight, be born to fight, be strong,
Mm-hmm.
in many ways. So if a baby was born that didn't seem like it was going to make the cut, they got rid of it.
Well, and then in the in-between time, um, the infant mortality rate was so high. It's like, well, we don't kill babies, but they die so often, so that like you don't get too attached to them. So like our relation,
Right.
even with kids, like okay, well, we're not going to sacrifice or kill them anymore. But you still didn't have the same like everyone is this huge tragedy because they were just not to ruffle anyone's feathers about what reality was, but they were dying left and right. Like that was just part of reality. It's a very
Yes.
modern concept with modern science and modern economy and modern world. It's like most of them live most of the time. So it's like, okay, now we can slow down, like have a different
Right.
engagement with it. But that's not most of human history. That's a
No,
new
it
thing.
is. It is so interesting to think. I That's been something that that I've been gearing up to ask as we talk, because it's kind of two questions. But do are so philosophy do philosophies evolve, or do different schools of thought kind of exist as they are, and you start to pick and choose from them? Because I suppose the point of a philosophy is to be as universal as possible, to be fundamental principles rather than too
The
high
trouble
minded.
is, like, chemistry is rooted in philosophy, right? So chemistry is evolving. So it just depends on the school of thought. When you get to like,
I guess because
mathematics,
I haven't
right?
really heard anything new from Stoics. Like Stoicism is Stoicism, and you just use it
Yes.
and live that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. When you get to the higher, not higher, the more abstract truth philosophies, the idea is to lock down the first principles, and the ideas those don't change. How they interact with the world does, but the things you're finding don't change. Versus, pragmatism, right? So it's like, okay, we're focusing on the results. Well, again, your first principle is the same, right? It's like we're focused on results, but the way you interact with that is very different.
Okay, then that begs my next question. Do you think, especially ancient philosophers, could be plopped into the modern world and still agree with themselves? Because they had a time and a place and a population density
Mhm.
that was much, 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 much less.
Well,
So,
those most funny things. I think they could. I don't think they would.
right,
If you
right,
took any of them and dropped them here, they would be overloaded, and all their high-minded philosophy would fall apart. Not
right,
because it was untrue, just because it wasn't built to handle all the contexts that now exist.
right. So, take Gautama, the Buddha, right? You know, he noticed the world is suffering and all that, their life is suffering largely. Would just the sheer amount of people on Earth, would he come up with that again? Like, it's pretty obvious, I guess, with the with the sheer amount of people on Earth that life is suffering.
Well, he was at
In
a
the
place that had a large sheer amount of people, so he's well equipped philosophically to handle it.
Good point. No, I must admit that was a very good one, because India has always been pretty dense as
Hmm.
far as population.
It's been around a while.
Yeah,
Lots
it
of people.
has. Yeah, yeah, cradle of the world and whatnot. Well, that in Africa, but yes. So I guess I kind of answered the question myself then, but that's the whole point of these. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, because that's my whole thing is like, okay, we have all these words of wisdom, things like that. Do they actually hold up in modern context? Because there was a time when
Yes.
you could just be on a mountaintop by yourself and no one would fucking bother you. But now that's not
Well,
really
but the reality is most philosophers, even if they were, how would you put, privileged? Don't like that word because it's loaded, but privileged.
mm-hmm,
Um, Most of them lived. It wasn't until much later you get the academic philosophers. Um, mm, I guess it's hit or miss, right? Because you get like Socrates, who was a war hero, Lao Tzu, who was active in politics. So it's like, well, he's part of the privileged class, but like he was still part of like making decisions and stress in life. He wasn't.
mm-hmm.
He went off to the mountain, as it were, but he wasn't there when he was developing his philosophy.
Right. He
Um,
retired to the mountain. Yeah. He wrote it
yeah,
before he got there. That's how the story
hmm
goes.
yeah, and you find that all the strongest
He wrote the
philosophers.
strongest per my last email note ever.
I don't know much about Nishi. Nishi? I never know if I'm pronouncing his name right.
I believe you're saying it right, to my
Yeah.
knowledge.
I feel like he was an academic, but man, did that dude like. put in some philosophical work.
I'm trying to remember. I did read up on his life at one point. It's been a
The,
very
the,
long time.
the thing is, he like aggressively tackles things. So, example, right? With the Buddha, if you're like, okay, can you prove reincarnation? He's like, well, no, or yes, because I am reincarnated. Like, it can't, it doesn't work.
Right.
Um, so that's where people tie Nishi to nihilism, is because he's like, I'm gonna build something you can't knock out at the legs that easy. So he kept
Right.
building things and then taking hammers and flamethrowers and chainsaws to them and be like, okay, well, that didn't hold. What next? And he kept doing that and doing that and doing that. Um,
He's using what's called the null hypothesis, I found out.
mhm. Yep. Which makes it's really fun to read, hard to read, but if you could follow along, you're like watching him build up and then eradicate and then build up and then eradicate.
Hmm.
Um, but like, yeah, with like Buddhism, you get the two separate parts, right? The philosophical and the religious. The religious part, which the philosophical part is kind of built on, is pretty easy to take out.
Hmm.
So,
And that's the whole thing with religion is it is easy to dismantle, but that's kind of like I don't know if that's on purpose, but that's understood more or less. And I'm not going to go into the whole thing. Well, it's faith. You just have faith. That's not really what I'm talking about. It's that we need to personify the greater existence. That's why polytheism was a thing in so many parts of the world for so much
well,
of history.
we need a good narrative, and that's where I made a little rant. Like, there's something pretty good about the whole religious thing. It's not religion; it's a good narrative. We just don't have any good narratives for being alive anymore.
It's true. I
So
mean,
everyone's just looking at the
yeah,
reality, which is you work, you buy, you sleep, you poop, you die. Like there's not a story for being alive anymore. And the people that are faced with that are religious are doubling down on the religion because they are terrified of it. And the
yeah,
people who haven't gotten through that slump are just making no sense because you human beings need a narrative. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we'll transcend. I don't think that's true, based on how much we consume stories more than ever, trying to
yeah,
find narrative because we just don't have a story for ourselves anymore. That would be my
absolutely.
take on it. Hot take.
No, that's absolutely true. And there's a little book. It's not very long. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and it's kind of based on what you're talking about. How we need we need a reason. We need to either identify with a goal or just have a narrative, like you said. For him, Viktor Frankl he was a survivor of the Holocaust. He spent time in the concentration camps, saw horrors the likes of which we hope to never see again, and his whole summation of that, he survived because he needed to write his psychology thesis. That he had notes for it on the train and they were taken away. And his whole like flame in the dark was I will survive to write these things, to write my thoughts on the human experience and psychology and all that. And obviously the concentration camps informed a lot of that after the fact. But that was his, again, like that flame in the dark, the thing that kind of kept him going throughout the atrocities and the hardships. And I'm not saying we all need to experience that kind of hardship or any kind of hardship necessarily to feel alive, but we should try to identify somehow with something that is
See,
important to us.
then how do you argue against religion? Because religion's really good at that for most people. It's a nice little happy meal kit for purpose and meaning.
Okay, yeah. So I say you can use religion. So the way you just described it is that it's for them. It's for them. Frankl wanted to write this for everyone. I have to serve the world. I have to survive so I can serve the world by providing these thoughts.
But that's just a different type of person. This is the trouble I have with being a philosopher and loving philosophy. The world would be better with more active engagement in philosophy, but that's just me as a philosopher being like, I think, my genre of music's great or whatever. Um, but that's not the reality we live in. Um, so then what do you do? That's been like one of my big troubles with it.
I think
Although to be fair,
he
like,
didn't. So here's the thing. He kind of sticking to Frankel, and I don't want to put words in his mouth. But he writes about all this, and he wrote about all this. He's passed away, but it's not about the reception of his work. It's just he needs to survive so he can try and better humanity as a whole by providing these things. I feel like if you're holding on to religion, you're just hoping for the best for yourself,
mhm.
which I guess could also be valid, whatever helps you live. But you just have to have your what?
We can tell people they have to have a thing that's about other people. Like that's you're
No,
imposing a system on people, right? Like,
no, I don't think so. I don't think because that's not really it. I don't play music for other people necessarily. I mean, I do physically because that's
mhm,
how you do it. But no, I get better at the trombone. Like it just so happens to be music for me. But
mhm.
I just have a thing that I want to get better at.
Right.
Period. Full stop. So whatever floats your boat in that regard.
Then the trouble is you get the clashes of the philosophies, the clashes of the religions. That's where it's tricky.
Sure. Well, I'm not trying to impose my playing on other people. They have to come to me to hear it. I don't go, I don't like
Right.
force them to
But,
listen.
but specifically talking in the grand play of the world with philosophy, um, there's people use fallacies and stuff like that. It's like, do you take out their fallacies because they're wrong, even if the fallacies are what's holding up their sense of meaning? And that's a philosophical question right there. Like, is the truth more important than their sense of comfort being alive in a world of
Mm-hmm.
suffering?
Mm-hmm. Well,
The
that
right answer
starts
is
to.
truth, just so you know.
If it can be destroyed by the truth, it deserves to be destroyed by the truth. Yes, that's a big one. And honestly, but speaking, you know me, I'm a people person, right? So uh, I agree with you completely. I am also part of the reason I so obsessively study psychology and communication, things of that nature, is because I am just avoidant of conflict. I don't want conflict. I just don't want it. It's just I'm still training myself to be okay with it because it is unavoidable in some areas. Um, but that's more personal to me. In general, I study it because I firmly do believe that there is a way to present everything so that people can accept what you're saying. I firmly believe that there is a way to do that. Now, that way is fluid. It's not a static, this is how you say something to get everyone to understand you. That's why it's so difficult. It's because you have to gauge, you have to read the room, you have to gauge your audience, gauge the person you're talking to or the people you're talking to see how they are going to receive what you say and to try and formulate it. So it's a game you play. It's a very fluid game.
So this is right. So first, I'm going to mention this. We have a Patreon, $1. Just if you could support us with $1, because we want to have more time because we both work 2 jobs worth or more. But
Mm-hmm.
example, it would be really fun for this project to test that hypothesis by going like taking a concept we know doesn't fit with somebody. So whether it's left or right side, right? We take something from the other side, and then try and see if we can walk them through without triggering to the other side and like get to an agreement. That would be really fun to do and like record it and like show the experience. Neither of us has time for that. So support us. Patreon. But
It's
that would be
true.
fun
It's
to do
true.
because I like the concept and in theory sounds like it would work. But also in theory, if it would work, then we just need like, I don't know, a handful of those people going through town to town, right? And it would fix that. Right. So if that really works, I really want to know because that'd be great.
That'd be hilarious. Oh, they have a uniform. Just they'd be like the traveling judges of old, but not judges, more just
See, the trouble is
what
if
would you
they
call them?
had a uniform, it wouldn't work because you have to be able to like subterfuge.
Right,
Because it's like,
right.
I know what you're gonna do. You're gonna make me agree with things I don't agree with. It's like, no, the whole point is you do agree with it. No, 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 no. I see where you're going.
It's true. Some people do dig their heels in on principle. It doesn't even matter after that.
Well, most people
Uh,
do. You're attacking their sense of purpose and meaning.
we are just mammals, so if you do that, we start to we get a little ornery.
Mhm.
uh,
That's
but
why,
yeah, that is really something that I truly believe in, and it takes, again, talking about the self development portion of things, it takes practice to be able to do that, and it's an
which is why,
ever going practice because each person you talk to, hell, the same person you talk to is going to have different moods and different viewpoints and different growth opportunities, and
I don't know.
it's never the
People
same
are
person twice.
marketing that disagree with you. People are not as different as they like to think, which is part of the point. But there are archetypes, personality traits, and everyone has a unique experience, but they're not a unique person.
No, it's true. Absolutely. Have you ever noticed, to kind of to that point, how, everybody looks different, but you can definitely pick out some features like, oh, that person has this kind of face,
Oh
like
no,
that kind of
everybody
shape.
has a doppelganger. You have somebody in the world that looks exactly like you.
Yeah.
Like, if you measured everything, it would be slightly different, but walking by, you could pass for twins.
It's true. Everyone has one. Yeah. The funny thing is sometimes they're in closer proximity than you think, which means we probably have many because there's 8 billion people on this planet right now.
Which again, even your look isn't unique. Maybe the style of
Oh,
clothes you put on your body, but even then,
hell
like
no. Scruffy with a man bun? Are you kidding me? You can't
somebody
sneeze
asked,
in this neighborhood without hitting 4 people that look exactly like this. It's
I had
it's
somebody
just part of
ask
it.
in one of the comments if I was in some other city in some other state, like, were you at this bar? I was like, nope.
But again, and that's just it. We can feel individual because we have our own unique experience, but
We
we
also
make
think
it
it's more
easy.
unique
We make it
than it
easy
is.
by kind of checking some boxes here and there. It's fine.
But
It is fine.
we also think it's more unique than it is. That's part of the struggle with the whole thing. Is we
Right.
have a sense like we can only experience our experience, so we discount other experiences. Very similar to the gratitude equation, where it's like if you
Sure.
open yourself up to, it's one of my favorite thought experiments that I do, which I guess is philosophical, so it fits this. Um, it weirds people out because I do it in the car all the time, and I'll point it out just to mess with people because they'll be just driving and they're like either just on hum or like daydreaming about something. But I'm looking at all the houses and like every one of those houses has a person in it with a job and a mom and a dad. Like I'll start
Yeah.
like looking at all the houses and taking in like how many people and how many stories and how many like elements and contexts are just in that one house out of the 30 that are in the neighborhood. There's all like it's fun for me.
It
Overload for other
is.
people, but it's
It is. No,
nuts.
it can be overwhelming to think about, but man, the earth is just so full of life, like human life especially. Like we we get caught up in our own bubble so often, but everyone has their bubble. Like everyone's doing that. Look at all the people driving around you when you're on the highway next time. Like all those people are living their lives.
Yeah,
It's
the
it's
traffic
mind-boggling.
traffic is a great um, example for like how philosophy and psychology are playing out in the world, morality is playing out in the world. Because like when people
Yeah.
feel anonymous, like the reality of the science is there's never really a good reason for a traffic jam. They should
Right.
clear up. If everyone drove correctly, and this is the thing, there is a correct way to drive. If everyone drove correctly, they would clear up very quickly. But people don't because they're like, I'm gonna get there faster, and then everybody gets there slower.
It's
even though
true.
we know, even though we know how it works.
It's absolutely
There's a
true.
lot of mysteries in
I
the
know
world. This
folks,
isn't one of them.
this isn't one of them. I know folks who will avoid they will avoid stoplights down a street and go to where there's roundabouts. They love the feeling of just keep it on going.
Well, and they are objectively faster.
They are, but I'm talking about like they go out of their way to use them type of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
'Cause once you get over the fear of how weird they are the first couple times, they're nice.
They're not weird. I don't, whatever. Yeah. Man, side story, but I was in the Philippines at one point in my life, and we stayed in this high-rise hotel outside of I think I counted it on Google Maps once. It's like 8 lanes of that, maybe not that many. It's like 5 lanes or something. It's an obscene amount of lanes in a roundabout.
That would make me uncomfortable.
It made me uncomfortable. One day, my dad and I woke up to music. This is when I was in high school, so I was in marching band in high school and all that stuff. And we woke up hearing like a band music, and we're like, no, what? No, what? And we look out the window. There's a fucking marching band going through this 8-lane roundabout. Oh, and I don't know if you guys know much about the traffic situation in like the Southeast Asian area. Traffic, like the government wasted money on traffic lights. I'll tell you that much.
More like guidelines.
Yeah. And now the funny thing is, I took many cabs in the Philippines, and there's horns honking. Everyone's going. They all got like shitty 70s American like love music. I don't know, but the thing is, it's all very like, I don't know if Zen's the right word, but it's all very like, it's understood. So the honking is not like I'm pissed off like we do here. It's just like, oh, there's 3 inches there. I'm going to take it. And I'm just letting everyone know, that's mine. And they just kind of make space for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's all very fluid. And I always joke, you have to have a resolute acceptance of death when you get into a cab in Southeast Asia, but came out unscathed. It was just fine.
Taoism is showing.
Yeah, absolutely. You just go with it. We're doing this now. Okay. Yeah. So, but it's so kind of wrenching us back on track here. Is it required to have a philosophy, even if it's not like part of a school necessarily? Like, is it required to have one?
Better questions. Should it be taught like in schools? Like, should kids at middle school start learning about philosophy, then get more advanced in middle school and more advanced in high school?
Well, question about your question. Is it taught in schools, but taught as like, this is the way you think, not
you work
this is
how
how you
think. Schools. How many schools have a philosophy class that aren't a high school elective?
No, it's true. The thing is, the stupid part is, which is kind of what I was leading into with that question, was a lot of schools, public schools at least. I can't speak to private schools, but they're not that different. Let's be honest, school is school. It's kind of a conveyor belt. You're just kind of plopped on, and you learn the material you're supposed to learn. You forget it when it's not relevant to the test anymore, and you end up on the other side expected to contribute to this greater society somehow.
Well, you're supposed to produce a test score so that the school gets a ranking, and the school gets money for that ranking. You are a product.
Right. So I feel like a philosophy is imposed upon you, and you take it as how you're supposed to think about the world.
But
how you're supposed to view things.
Nobody does, though, right? That's the thing, is like,
oh yeah, we all sense it's bullshit. We all sense the bullshit. We can feel it in our bones when we're
But this is one of those things that I struggle with as a philosopher of like, okay, I'm pretty sure it'd be easy to get people to agree that the point of school shouldn't be to pump out grade machines to make money for the school. It's like, oh, it's about getting a job. It's like, well, then you should learn a lot more trade skills. But even if it's to be a better human, let's say at the very least, you come out of school a better person, a better human being to contribute to society, then a philosophy course should be required every year and just get more advanced as you go on. Like,
right. And I know
learning how to think.
Yeah, and I know some English tracks, if they don't have philosophy particularly, I guess it does depend on the teacher, but I learned philosophy through English and just through my own study. So kind of defeating my own point in a way, but I can think of specific teachers, mostly my music and my English teachers, that would get you thinking more philosophically.
Well,
But
that's just
maybe
because
that
they're
was
good
just special to
teachers.
those people. I don't know.
Yeah,
Say that again.
yeah, that's just because they're good teachers. All good teachers teach philosophy in their class because it's the single most important thing. Everything comes from it.
Right. I
You can't
love blowing my
understand.
students. I do that. I definitely do that. I blow my students' minds. Their first lessons. My whole thing is, look, my job is to make it so you don't need me. And they're all just like, what? Yeah. It's
Yeah, because if
my
you
job
learn
is
to
to become
learn,
obsolete. Yeah. If you pick up what I'm putting down, you just keep picking it up.
mhm.
Yeah. So, and that's really like, again, simple. It's very simple, but not easy to achieve that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So I wonder.
So again, my point is, I'm pretty sure we can get most people to agree on that. And then this is where you get to the like, well, the system doesn't want that, right? The capitalists don't want that. The corporations don't want that. It's like, okay, okay, okay. Where do they get their money? Like two places: banks and people, us, the people who are complaining, and like we all agree that we want this. They're like, well, we don't want that. It's like, okay, well, they get a lot of their money from us. So if we want to change it, we have to change where we're putting our money. And that comes like the buck stops with the people, like it does, because the money's only as good as people allow it to be. So it comes back
It's
down to the
true.
individuals. But I don't know what to do with that because it seems, because again, simple. It makes sense. It's like, okay, yeah, if we just stop giving money to them, they don't have the money to then buy the system. It doesn't seem that
Yeah.
crazy. But
It's,
then it's
I
like,
think a lot of
how
it,
do you do the habit changes and blah blah blah?
yeah, no, it's, and that's why I mentioned to you a couple conversations ago, offline, uh, how I think that's why a lot of smart people are kind of sad a lot of the times is because we know there are solutions to these problems, but to get to those solutions is next to impossible. The unraveling of these knots is monumental.
The how to change the system part is pretty straightforward. How to get people to do that? I, I,
Right, because a lot of folks benefit. They either benefit from it, so why would they change that? Or a lot of folks just feel overwhelmed by the thought because it's it's just the fact of, oh, another thing I have to care about. That is one thing that we get bombarded with the internet, these days, rah rah rah. But it's very much like, hey, this thing, you should care about this thing that's happening. Or these people, you should care about these people that need your care. It's just everything is red alert at all times, it
I
seems.
think it's more a point that you've said several times. It's one of my favorite quotes from you, which probably somebody else said, but I've heard it from you. We don't rise to the occasion; we fall to our habits. And the thing
Oh,
is,
yeah.
where do you get your habits? Well, you get your habits from the school system. School system says just coast by. Here's what you have to do. Do what you need to in your free time to decompress, and that's it. So you don't learn to build a skill. You don't learn to do the discipline. You don't learn all that stuff unless you just happen to get into like an art or a hobby or something that interests you enough that you do it on your own. But
Yeah.
most people are built with the habit structure that doesn't allow them to just enact discipline outside of like, I need the discipline to get this grade because it's just what I have to do, right? It's the discipline to go to a job. It's not the discipline to change a habit.
Yep. And to your point of me being completely unoriginal, that was James Clear, Atomic Habits.
Mm.
Now,
Well,
I expound on that. My theory, my original portion of that is why we love the reason why we love like superhero movies and stories so much, because they're different. They seem to just rise to the occasion because they're heroes. We love them because we're not like that.
mhm.
We like to think that we are, but we're not. That's We like to think, oh, if this happened, if a shooter walked into my office building, this is what I would do. No, you'd piss your pants and play dead. Is what you would do. That's a smart. If you're smart, that's what you're gonna do. Uh, but that's a whole nother thing. But uh, yeah, to really put your money where your mouth is quite difficult. quite
But
difficult.
again, my point is we're just not equipped for it. If you equipped people with those skills throughout their life more effectively, it would change things.
Hmm.
So this is where you get like there's a lot of incentive for academics and school and education not to change. Because I'm one of the big proponents of like, if we change that, the rest of it'll probably work itself out.
Yes, it is that simple. Within 2 generations, I
Mhm.
think is usually around when that would be like a complete overhaul type situation. So it is doable. But again, we're getting into, so one of the beautiful and frustrating parts of the US is that it's massive and it's just full of lots of different people with different ideas and different, they want different things for their children or for their society, for their immediate vicinities. So getting everyone on the same page with that
Well,
is
according to you, there's a way to walk everyone to the common ground. So,
true. No, I agree. I'm just trying to say that is like, there needs to be a way to, yes, you can get someone doing that, but everyone dies. That's the issue, Michael. Everyone dies. And so new people take over.
which
So you do need
admittedly,
to make it a generational wave of, you need that continuity.
which watching current events, I think we got a pretty good chance with that because a lot of the people that have been there a long time are all old. There's this
Hmm.
big gap between the pretty young people and it wasn't like a pretty regular flow. It's lots of old people, and then the new wave's all significantly younger. So we have a pretty optimistic outlook on how things probably will go. Um,
If we're prepared for it, because otherwise they just move into the old spots and old habits just take
Obviously,
over.
they were raised in a different world, so their habits and sense of the world are very different. So
It's true.
we're, we're
I do ponder this type of thing, and we might be off topic a little bit, but yeah,
we are
that's our chats.
way off topic.
That's our chats. Well, we are, and
All
we're
these
not. That's
notes, and we didn't do most of them.
we'll get to it. We'll get to it. Um, but that's so. I often wonder if it's the case of the position, the like,
Mm-hmm.
you see it in some stories, where what's a good one? When I'm elected or when I'm king or whatever it is, I'll change things. And they get into that position and the position ends up changing them
I'm sure we haven't
because,
seen, or I haven't seen Game of Thrones, but I'm sure it's a concept in there. We talk about Fable, all that it takes place in there. Um,
right.
I did a Twitter piece of content about that and like wealth. Like
Sure.
you figure, like if yeah, looking at like the statistics of wealthy people, it's like yeah, sure they do charity and stuff like that, but if more wealthy people used more of the money to like help the system, right, the middle wealth, not the upper wealth, if more of the middle wealth used it, it would change the whole system, and they not enough of them do, which seems odd. So is it because the people that get to that point are already wired that way, or is it because getting into the position dictates the behaviors? Um, but yeah, it's all made up. To get back to the philosophy point, it's all made up. So
It
in
is.
theory, well,
It
I guess
is.
it's not all made up because
But
you
to
are playing
try and,
you're
but
playing
that's
with
just it.
reality.
There's skin in the game. That's just it. There's skin in the game.
Yeah.
So like,
All
yeah,
right.
they
All
know
right.
it's made up. They know it's made up, but if they admit that or if they start to play that way,
No, what's not made up is how are people getting housed and food, and how are you dealing with
right.
people that want to
That's
kill
yeah.
you and take your houses and food.
That's
That's real.
exactly what I'm getting at. That's exactly
Yeah.
what I was trying to lead to. Yes. So yeah, the concept of money, yeah, it's a representation of goods. It's not a good in and of itself.
We do
But
need to get the goods around somehow.
exactly. Right. Yeah. No, that was a very interesting part of, Sapiens
Mhm.
was the concept of money. And it was basically like, well, I can't raise chickens and grow vegetables and and make pottery and, do all these things. So I can raise chickens, but not everyone needs chickens all the time. So
Mhm.
it's that kind of representation of like, well, screw it. We'll just have these rocks that represent whatever you need. If you need chickens at that time, use them to get chickens from the people who raise
Yeah,
chickens.
we're gonna do a whole deep dive on money.
Hmm.
I think people misunderstand money a lot.
Well,
So that's what
certainly,
I'm
yeah,
looking forward to.
certainly. So, yeah, to get back to philosophy, I mean, it's everything we are talking about. Yes, we're going extremely tangential on many tracks,
Hmm. Because
but
we started talking philosophy instead of talking about philosophy.
yes, I know. I'm sorry. But that's the trap, isn't it? We all it's like so easy to fall
Okay,
into
so
that.
hard pivot,
Yeah.
logic and reason. So
Okay.
that's one of the biggest things in the Western world. But I guess I mean it's kind of dominated, and it's not exclusive to the West. It just got popularized in the West in a different way. Um, but you see a lot of. It's weird because religious people, like the conservatives, are really trying to lean on what they consider logic and reason, even though some of the things they have are easily toppled by that particular philosophical school. Um,
Yeah. Now you're talking about things like the scientific method is out of that, but maybe not
but it's yeah,
the way. Yeah.
it's the concept that there is a reasonableness that exists, right? That
Okay.
there is certainties and ways of thinking, um, which leads to the modernist philosophical school, um, which is basically that well, there's a way to get things better, like a specific way. There's a reality, there's truths, there's certainties, and from these we can make things better and move towards an ideal state. That there is these ideals that are maybe achievable, maybe not, but we can move in those directions, and they're objective in a sense. Where postmodernism is all that's wrong,
Yeah.
which I that it makes me feel like I don't know old school, where it's like I think modernism is better than postmodernism. Like I see postmodernism the same way I see nihilism, where it's like it's a good thought experiment. It's a great way to like sort your thoughts out. It's not a very functional system.
Right. No, it has a cap, right? You can only get so far with it before it topples in on itself.
Well, it literally is self-cannibalizing. If nothing's true,
Right.
end of discussion.
Right. Right. Yeah, either nothing matters, nothing's true. But
And
if
then why
that
are
is
you
true,
all
then yeah.
yelling about so much? If it's
Right. Right. Oh
just
my goodness. Because misery loves company. Like speaking psychologically now,
Mhm.
if you think about it, it's way easier to connect with somebody by complaining than
Mhm.
about talking about what's good.
But then you can just
Way
make up
easier.
everything. You can make up what you're complaining about. You can make up what the trouble is. You can make up what the solution is. You don't have to think about anything,
Right.
which is my point I was trying to make with like the pivot to like logic and reason. Um, it it would seem it would be good to like have a social what you put it, inclination to have like another enlightenment where we revisit reason and logic and stuff like that in a modern context. I feel like that would be good. I'm very tired. When I was trying to earlier on like thought experiment like play devil's advocate against myself, I was too tired to work through that
Hmm.
particular thing. But
Absolutely. I think it is important for us both to remember. I agree with you, first of all. Uh, but it is important for us to remember that even during the Enlightenment period, there were, you know, religious conservatives who poo-pooed it. It's ongoing.
well, and the French Revolution was a result of that, where it's like, what's bad? Monarchies. Let's kill them. You can't keep your bloodline
Yeah.
going if there's no one alive to keep the bloodline going. Logic.
Right.
So yes, it's
Uh,
not perfect, but people aren't perfect.
no, not
That's
by any
part of the thing
stretch.
to remember. Everyone's looking for a perfect system,
Yeah.
which is the criticism of actual modernist thought. The actual modernist movement believed that there was an ideal, it was achievable, um, in a very concrete sense.
Yeah.
It wasn't fluid
Over. Let
enough.
me let me ask you this: so the modern idea, uh, is it achievable over generations, that kind of a thing, or is it like within your lifetime? You too can achieve nirvana, that kind of stuff.
It's always going to pitch. I mean, it's the classic 1950s trope of the sci-fi. That the sci-fi was always near.
Sure.
That's a modernist thing where it's like, yes, like, you know, we already have microwaves, like, and in your children's lifetime, they'll have home cooking robots that make all the meals. Like, they believed in it wholeheartedly. It's like, we
Right.
can do this. It's right there. We just gotta reach
Right.
out and grab it. But it's a little blinders on the horse, which is where postmodernism is like, okay, we're gonna rip off the blinders, pull the eyes out of the horse, and make it look everywhere.
I guess. Yeah.
But now it's not
Man.
going anywhere. At least it was going somewhere.
Right. Yes.
Oh,
Because
and
so the
I guess,
reason.
yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
on. I was just gonna be like, and the two world wars came out of the like post enlightenment thing. So I mean, it's just like not perfect, but you could be said those were growing pains to some degree, or we started playing with these ideas and we're figuring it out. And human beings are very messy when we, you know, try new
No, it's
things.
true. We are absolutely true. We are part of nature. We talk about this in Taoism. We are not separate from nature. We try to think that way sometimes. We try to act that way sometimes. We are part of the natural world. Nature, when it corrects things or changes things, uh, is not always gradual. Sometimes, especially when it corrects things, when nature changes, yeah, that's often quite gradual. When it corrects things, it is often fast and violent. That
Well,
is how
it's
nature
it's
works.
one of two, right? It's either ear ear you can't perceive it, right? It's so slow you don't notice the change,
Hmm.
which is kind of my case I would make, which is the modernist in me being like progress. Um, but it's so slow you don't notice the change. So it's like, well, if you take a snapshot of right now, it's like, oh, look at all these bad things. It's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But if you take it out a little bit, like we're working our way there. Um,
Hmm.
or it's catastrophic. But there's not a lot of
Right.
like, this is a problem. Okay, I'm just gonna like smoothly tinker this into the right place. It either takes a long time or it's like, nope, correct.
Yep. Absolutely. So my thought about this. So have you heard of the term generational trauma?
Trauma's a hot word right now.
It is. It is. And I do think that generational trauma is real. So because our bodies, have a visceral reaction to certain stimuli, all stimuli, really,
Mm-hmm.
but especially what we'll term negative stimuli, like
Mm-hmm.
things that cause us to be tense all the time, or things like that. Something I would consider real trauma. That word is thrown around a lot, like mindfulness. Just
Mm-hmm.
it's thrown around a lot without really meaning what it really is. But so the real trauma of physical reaction, visceral reaction in a negative way, our bodies do remember that in a way. And so if you are having children with your body,
Yeah,
things do get passed on.
there's a new science. It starts with an E. Is it epistemology? No, that's one of the philosophy terms. There's one about like the gene, uh, like locking and unlocking that they've been studying a lot more recently.
Okay.
Epigenetics. There we go.
Got it. Okay.
Um, but yeah, it's very much that concept where it's like somebody who's fit, like their kids have a propensity to be fitter. Somebody who's obese, their kids have a propensity to be obeser. Now, in your life, you can change those. You can flip them on and off by the way you handle your physiological ecosystem. But they start like with some on and some off based on what your parents had, and that includes things like trauma responses because those are hardwired in.
Absolutely. And yeah, to your point that you kind of already brought up, I was going to mention that the opposite can happen. If someone, if a Zen monk starts having kids, uh, those kids will probably be a little like preset, quote unquote, to be a little more calmer and ready to handle
Mm-hmm.
adverse situations in a more healthy way, perhaps. So I think you're absolutely right to bring it back to we all need to study philosophy somehow. Because if you can start putting those things in your body, because your brain is part of your body, so as soon as you start implementing those things and feeling them more or less, to put it in super simplistic terms, uh, I think that can become generational. Maybe I'm full of shit. Someone who knows more than me about these things could probably tear me apart on it. I welcome that because I want to learn.
Yeah, the
But
theory is like if you study it, right, like when your kids start talking to you to figure things out, you pass along, even just from a cultural thing, right, from mouth to ear, like the
mhm,
philosophical concepts, which then help them build a different perception of the world, a different way of thinking.
right. Yeah. And the nature versus nurture argument has been a very hot debate for ever since it was conceived.
Mm,
But because it is like, okay, well, is like a calm level person with a kid who is calm and level, did they teach them to be that way? Or are they and it is both. Why can't it be both? It's both.
it's
Well,
both. It's both.
it's both. And that's a
But
good
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
We want it to be both.
As
And
above,
if
so
it's the other
below.
one, then you need to do the other way. Like, well, if it's, because you can be too calm and too level headed as well. You do need some, fire in you in some regards.
Which one of the core tenets of Taoism is spontaneity,
Yeah. So,
spontaneousness.
so pencil that in. Be spontaneous. Yeah.
6 o'clock this Sunday.
Yep. I will be spontaneous.
Spontaneous.
Oh, it's true. I'm so happy we study because Taoism is my flavor of philosophy. It's my philosophy of choice.
It's the
So
philosophy I discovered and didn't have a word for because there isn't a word for
technically speaking, that's in the first part of that little book there.
it.
Yes. So for those listening, I highly recommend you listen to the episode before this one, essentially, in the
If you haven't
series.
already.
Right. Yeah,
If you liked it, we're going to do more cool stuff like that, where
indeed.
we actually stay on topic the whole time.
It's true. Like that's part of the plan. Yeah.
Uh,
But these are meant to be just our thoughts on stuff because conversations go wonderful ways when you let them. And so it's good to just let it just explode. It's again so Taoist, right? It's like we're doing this now. Okay, let's enjoy doing
oh, and
this now.
it's the fact that like there's threads that connect all of it. We could switch to almost any topic because, ironically, we have the underlying element of our conversations as philosophy. Which I realized
Hmm.
that looking up the philosophy stuff, it's like, oh, we do a philosophy podcast because our conversations all just have philosophy on the underlying part, which connects to everything. So we can switch from sports to anime to economics to music to baking. Like it just because you just pop down to the philosophy part, move on over, like boop 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 boop. Like
It's true. Much like Michael's computer, all those tabs are open at once. We just switch
I
to
had
them,
so many tabs with the Taoism thing. I wanted to learn it all.
which is anti-Taoist, really.
No, I accepted that I wasn't going to.
That's okay. That's pretty Taoist. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But and we talk about this a little bit in the there's an episode we talk about balance and like it all kind of ties together. That's what you just said. But we talk about these things separately and also not because they're very tangential, but it's to prove the whole point of everything is everything is one, right? If we're going to go that
My
route.
trouble, yeah, is if we talk too long, we always end up on the same conclusions. That's why we got to keep them topic focused,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is
But
crazy because we can have a whole different conversation, different references, different topics, and then we end at the same points.
yes, it's true. But I guess that's philosophy for you, huh?
Hmm? Which is that was one of the things I wanted to talk about was
Let's do it.
first principle thinking. So unfortunately, Elon Musk has made that like his thing. So which is stupid. He brings up good points, and if you're gonna try and be like, what's an example of it? It's a good example, but you don't need to whatever you think about him. You can disconnect him from the first principles thing. The first principles thing is like one step removed from nihilism. It's you take all of your assumptions and you start breaking them down until you're at like an assumptionless point. Now you're not dealing with meaning and purpose. You're focused on like how, you know, I need to work. Why do I need to work? Like, okay, well, I need to work so I need food, stuff like that. Okay, well how could like I need to get food so I can stay alive. Okay, boom. there. I need to be alive, so I need food. Is there other ways for me to get food? Well, I'd have to go out foraging. Okay, that's not very practical. I live in a city, can't hunt, so I need to get money so I can buy food. Okay, what ways can I make money? Right. So you hit like a point, then you start working your way back up. And it's not about like the metaphysics. You're not trying to figure out the meaning of it. You're trying to figure, okay, I'm doing this thing or I have this thing. How can I approach it like in the best way? So you go back to like a point where you hit, then you move your way back up to it.
It's the flow chart of life. I like it.
But that's one of my favorite philosophical concepts. It's one of the tools I use the absolute most. Because I mean, technically, it's most focused now the way people perceive it with like problem solving. Because of guys like Elon Musk, where it's like, oh, for like engineering and blah blah blah, but it works for anything. Um, any topic you can try and break down to first principles of like not nothingness, not the nihilism thing. You're not trying to get rid of, well, none of it matters. It's like, no, this is important, but what's the smallest thing I can break it down to, or what's the like most abstract thing I can hit it against and build up from that point to the practical situation again.
Yeah. And that can be to whatever level you desire. I remember I have a TikTok on our channel about 3 books that help you communicate better. And one of them, the last one on there, is A More Beautiful Question. And I use it for the communication standpoint there, but something else it does is to start helping you do exactly this. And the example they give is Toyota, the car company Toyota, where they ask why, I think a minimum of 5 times deep. They go deep, 5 whys deep into a thing. So the example they give, if I can recall correctly, if not, I'll paraphrase, but it's, there's a recall on a product of theirs, whatever it is. And so they ask, okay, why? It's because this piece of it is deficient. Okay, why? Because that part of the line, the people working there aren't in as good of conditions as the rest of the factory. Okay, why? Like they keep going in there to get to the actual root cause that will then just spring everything back to how it should have gone, rather than just address customer complaints and hope it all goes away,
Yeah, I think if somebody's going to try and take practical philosophy into their life, rather than trying to think of the meaning of the universe, dealing with the existential crisis, like just start practicing first principles in situations. Like, because for some things, like it'll accidentally tie you into gratitude. So for me, like I do first principles at my job all the time because it's a job, right? It's not like what I want to do with my life. But I like my job overall. But part of the reason is because I constantly run the first principles program. Where it's like, well, I gotta have a job because I have, a house and a family, and like then I like having a job. It's like, okay, well, I could have other jobs. It's like, yeah, but I've had other jobs compared to those jobs. Like this job, helps me burn more calories, which is another one of my goals. So being able to like fit all the pieces together, because with first principles, you're basically breaking things to pieces, so you can then position them where you want them to be or need to be, or understand where they fall into the positions. But the point is, you rather than just having this big colossal whole, you pull the pieces apart so you can then play with them, or just see the context.
Sure. Or if you have to go nihilist for a minute, knock the Monopoly board off the table, and
Yeah, don't do that. Would not recommend.
Yeah. No. And so you can choose a different game or decide to start over and play a different one. That's the whole thing. I run into that quite often, actually in video games, because I like playing things where you get to kind of customize your experience.
Mm-hmm.
So like, especially sandbox games like, Skyrim or The Witcher, even Pokemon. I really like Pokemon because you could choose which ones you want to use, that kind of stuff. I will consistently reinvent myself because I just want to explore that aspect. Okay, well, what if I was Skyrim? I do this quite often. It's like, well, what if I played this race and he were a thief who uses explosion magic to get away, that kind of it's like you just start to play out that fantasy, see how it goes. But because you always want to try different fantasies, different things, you never get too deep into one of them.
So, good. I have an example, video game related, of exactly this. I've been playing the MOBA game. So I was playing some of the non-famous ones, but I switched over to League of Legends just because there's a singular character in it that I really like and I'm really good with. I want to start playing rank matches. Well, in rank matches, you don't always get to pick the character you want because they can somebody else can pick it or people can block characters. So I need to be good with several players. And I've mentioned this on one of the other podcasts, but every single time I pick one, I suck with it. I'm like, okay, maybe it is just not the character for me. It's like, okay, maybe that's true, but also I just maybe haven't played it enough to learn how to play it. I have to like do this game where it's like, is it that this character just isn't compatible with my play style? Or is it that I just haven't played them enough to learn how to play them?
No, and that's exactly it. And that's part of the fun of those games is you can try to do both. You can find some that you jive with or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That can be with learning skills too. I have next to no interest in, I'm in the music industry, but I have next to no interest in the electronic equipment stuff, the recording technologies, soundboard. I tried. I really did. I just have but I have to have the knowledge, some of it at least. Got to be able to know where to put microphones, or at least stand near microphones. Kind of know which part of the board I am.
Mm-hmm.
You just need that stuff, just enough. Sometimes you need just enough to get by, so that I can focus on my strengths more.
Right.
So that's a big part of it. And philosophy is the same way, right? You can kind of pull different things. You don't have to like take a new piece of info and suddenly like eat it whole, and that is your new identity. That is
You don't need to discover not every single person needs to understand the mystery of the universe. Why are we here? And how is the perfect way to live? Like you don't need to do that.
That will breed the stereotype of every philosophy person being a pretentious asshole. Like
Mm-hmm.
we don't need that.
So it's my singular word. Where like somebody's pick a word, whatever. Mine's understanding. Like just if you're gonna take anything out of this episode, and like the what philosophy is understanding. So just take more time to try to understand things. And that's understanding people. It's understanding your emotions. Like it's understanding, even like how your job fits into the economy, right? Like any form of like actively trying to seek understanding is going to benefit you. So that would be my thing. Like that's the technical definition of philosophy. That's how you practice philosophy, and that's the most practical use of it. Is just seeking more understanding. You don't have to understand everything, but just more understanding. Starting where you're at, and pick things that are in your immediate like vicinity or context.
Certainly, and 2 exercises you can use that are pretty just immediately available to you are gratitude. Just start writing or even just thinking. Take a second to think about where what you have came from, where what you're doing, just whatever's happening to you, whatever's in front of you, pick a thing. And
you can pick the thing first before understanding why, right? So you can be like,
right,
pick 3 things you're grateful for. Don't have to think why you're grateful for them. Just write them down and then be like, okay, well, so why am I grateful for this? And then go into the understanding of why you wrote it down.
Precisely. That is the exercise. Yeah, you don't have to come up with, I'm grateful for my like don't feel like you have to put things down that you ought to. That's a trap we fall into.
Yep.
There's no rules to this really, other than, pick a few things. I got a pencil in front of me. I could find reasons to be grateful for this pencil. There's actually quite a few. They just all start, I love this pencil. But also, first principles thinking. I call it just asking. Be a toddler to yourself. Ask why incessantly to yourself, because that will help you just start to connect dots and dive into things. And gratitude as well. That's exactly what Michael was saying. Just pick a thing and then ask why. Simple as that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is why Socrates is famous, because you can distill the essential philosophical thing to just being able to ask why. How would you put it? With good faith, right? Like genuine intent. You're not trying to be redundant. You're trying to understand.
Yes. Yeah. Now, maybe don't do what toddlers do and ask different people all the time, because they're not always ready to explain their why all the time.
Well, and at some point it's like you're describing why the sky is blue, and then you start talking about the chemical composition.
That's the Louis C.K. joke, isn't it?
Yeah. They
Shut
start
up and
talking
eat your
about
Cheerios. Yeah.
the chemical composition. It's like, well, why is that chemical composition? Like, there's a certain point, which is the the thing is, you don't have to understand all of it, right? It's somewhat arbitrary, but I don't know, maybe five. Do the Toyota get 5 levels
Yeah,
deep on a
yeah.
thing?
And the thing is, like, five is just a good number just to like get thinking. You know,
Mm,
you might hit the answer that you resonate with at like two,
yeah.
or you might just keep going because it's fun after a while. This is kind of fun on some level. Maybe that's a little fucked up, but it is pretty fun. And I do that in preparation for our talks a lot. I have in my notebook where I will start asking myself questions and answering them as if I'm
Mm,
two people. I'll ask myself a question, I will answer that question, and then I'll ask a question based off of the answer I just gave. And it's
mhm.
most of the time it's why. So it's, you know, because that's the best one because you're forced to explain your thoughts. It's also just a good practice to be able to explain your thoughts to somebody else.
Yeah, it's good mental
It's an
exercise.
exercise. Yeah, it's an exercise in good communication overall, which only helps. So, and that's all I've got to say about that.
Yeah, and we're about to hit the 2 hour mark, and we're not going to risk the weird freezy screen thing.
Yes, 2 hours is
So
cursed.
that's why we're stopping now.
And we are grateful to you for listening.
Yeah, we feel that we have this thing to do. So I was
Absolutely.
exhausted, very exhausted. Then I went all Taoist on. I was like, well, trying to talk about philosophy and high mindedness when I'm exhausted from work and family and stuff. I'm like, if it's something to do even amidst life, then I should be able to talk about it now.
Yep.
So it's fun.
I was just in front of this isn't the suffering Olympics, but I was just in front of 200 kids for 4 hours. So that's always so I too am exhausted.
Right. Yeah. So it felt like was it auspicious in a contrary way. Where it's like today wasn't supposed to. I guess part of the things today wasn't supposed to be an episode. We're like we're gonna try and get one more in and get ourselves a little bit of a backlog going.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason we try and space out the recordings because we only got so much in us,
It's true. It's true.
especially with how busy we are. So if you want to help us be a little less busy, go to the Patreon. Just $1, please, $1. That's all it takes to make a life changing situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Honestly, I mean, I subscribe to a few things on Patreon. I don't even notice. You know, it's a completely forgettable thing, except for the content you receive, obviously. Like
Yeah.
the financial part is a completely forgettable, you know, process.
In case you're interested, we do put a portion of the Patreon money we get aside to support other people's Patreons and buy their stuff. So it's part of our project as we actively support other creators, but we also need to be able to just afford to keep this going. We spent a lot of the early investment money in supporting other people, and now we need to like re-up funds. So if you want to help us have more time and help us support other creators, support us. Be nice. You won't think about it. It's less than you spend on a coffee.
Way less with
Yeah,
the price of coffee these days.
you probably lose that much in change a month.
That's the real thing. Yes. You know,
So, so why do it? Because you're a good person and you want to support things. All right, we're gonna just keep rambling. Good night, everyone.
thank you much.
Oh wait, it's not night hour. Goodbye.